Welcome to Everything But the Tip, the podcast that bucks the trend of the mainstream golf content being churned out by the masses. Presented by the co-founders of Smart Golf and Fitness, we're on a mission to guide golfers towards genuine improvement. No swing tips, no shortcuts, we're anti-instant gratification. Join us as we navigate the complexities of the game, offering insights on how to truly excel in golf by embracing the challenges and breaking free from the usual quick fix mentality. All right, and we're back. And as promised, we're going to be recording a follow-up episode to an episode entitled The Physical Screen, which for those who did listen to it, Tommy did an excellent job at going through it in very detailed, very thoroughly, going through actually every single screen within that assessment. And I think doing a really good job at painting a picture of all of the discoveries that can be made within that assessment and how that relates to the golf swing. So our goal today is to just really isolate what we call 4 swing characteristics, as we decided to start calling them in the last episode.
Faults, bro. Just call them what
faults.
they are.
They are what they are. I mean, for the most part, I think swing characteristics, they started to label them as, you know, they didn't necessarily want to package some change or some swing elements, we'll call them, that there stood no chance to actually change. So they didn't want necessarily students to automatically look at them as a negative. So it was, I guess, a eloquent way to reframe an unpreferred way to move your body on the golf club. But at the end of the day, we all know this. There's a ton of different ways to get the club to the ball. I always say this, although that, you know, we do agree that there is one most efficient way to swing a club, right? But there's also one most efficient way for the individual. But just because it's most efficient for you doesn't mean it's the most efficient in general.
Yeah, because all bodies are different. Everybody's a little bit different. So despite the fact that somebody might come through and have similar results of their screen, doesn't automatically, relate to the exact same swing characteristic or swing fault. So
100%. Prior to getting started, I'm going to let you discuss the overall theme here in a minute. I just want to clarify and talk a little bit about just our swing change philosophy here at Smart. I don't want to go into it in complete depth, but I do think it's important to talk about a little bit in short to help complement the subject matter in today's episode. But we will have an episode coming out here soon that is going to be called our mechanical change philosophy, and we're going to go in a ton of depth and why we make swing changes, how we make swing changes, and I'm really looking forward to that episode. But as a whole, we've discussed it in past episodes. You know, we look at golf swings in general, the difference between a really consistent one producing consistent preferred results versus, call it a less consistent one producing less consistent preferred results. We've kind of just blanketed that answer is timing. And to expound upon that, basically what we mean by that, in timing being defined when the club strikes the ball, what we mean by that is all golf swings have a certain amount of movement, some preferred, some unwanted. We call those variables. The more variables in a golf swing, especially the unwanted variables in tonight's episode, and we'll call them swing characteristics or swing flaws, the harder that golf swing is to time. So that being said, the subject matter in which we discuss tonight might not necessarily apply to you, but I would say chances are it probably does, because we're going to be highlighting posture, which I'll let Tommy, dive deep into right now. But I think it's like 73% was the last stat that I had. Over 73% of golfers, for the most part, struggle with some sort of postural issue in their golf swing. So with that being said, Tommy, can we kind of enlighten our listeners on what we mean by posture?
I think before we go into that, the premise behind this episode is we identified all of the different testing that we do from a physical standpoint, and basically what sets us apart and what we pride ourselves on is it's easy to identify if something's going wrong, but to provide a real solution to be able to correct it. People are, easy to pick apart something they don't like, something that's not working well, but if they're not bringing a solution to the table, then what's the good in pointing that out? So same thing here. If we take you through this screening process, we find out all these areas of your body that, aren't working as well as they need to, and they might be having an adverse effect on your golf swing. What good is that if we don't provide some solution? So I thought it would just make sense to, a multi-part series. We're not going to get through all of the swing faults. I mean, there used to be 15, 16. I think there's like 18 now. So, we'd be sitting here all night and we'd have a snoozing audience just because that'd be a lot of information. So we picked a few tonight, like you said, talking about some postural ones. So I'll break that down in just a moment. But we really just want to talk about, what are these swing characteristics? How and why do they manifest themselves? And then just talk, how we go through that and stuff like that. But, the way that we came to tonight's, starting down this progression is just because, you're a PGA professional, right? So PGA stands for what again?
In posture, grip, alignment.
Well, I thought it was PGA Professional Golf Association, but yeah, coincidentally.
Well, I could give you an R-rated version of that too.
Yeah, we'll save that for the other episode and the outtakes and things. But coincidentally, Professional Golf Association also, goes with some of the primary areas that most golf instructors are taught to start with, and that's, again, what'd you say? Posture, grip, and alignment.
Sure.
So, everything starts with your posture. If you don't have the ability to get into a good, consistent setup posture, you're going to have a lot of compensations starting right from the get-go. So that's why most professionals start with that postural component.
No, 100%. I think that aligns with our philosophy, or part of our philosophy as well. We are a firm believer that the more you can do correctly in the beginning, the better the chances of you doing more later in the golf swing. So yes, if you're compensated right from the beginning due to postural issues, because that can happen both static and dynamically, yeah, chances are if you're in a poor posture, right, it's going to be challenging to move in a preferred pattern. Therefore, compensations will come from that.
Right, so everybody's pretty familiar with posture. Everybody's mom or somebody at some point has told them to sit up straight, quit slouching, things like that. So again, in the golf swing, or the beginning of the golf swing, the posture is just how you set up to the golf ball, how you address the golf ball, what position you put your body in to be able to get ready to make a golf swing. We do talk about it in two different elements. You just alluded to that as well, and that's kind of how these 4 swing faults, we've categorized them tonight. We've got 2 of them that are static in nature. Static posture, meaning like when you're still, when you're stable, when you've got that quiet moment before you're about to take the club away. So just how do you set up and how do you stand there prior to that? And then we've got dynamic posture faults. So what happens when the club's moving, when the body starts to move? And so we've got a couple of different ones. But I think it'll be useful, like you said, may not to apply to everybody, but I think at some point, in somebody's golf career, if they've taken any instruction, if they've watched any videos, they've adjusted their posture in some capacity, and they've probably experienced, some characteristics that they were not too fond of, so they've made some changes down the road, or maybe, hey, this is brand new to you. Excuse me. So you need to get in here and get it checked out. But without further ado, let's just talk about S posture at first. So you want to bring us through what kind of S posture is?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So S posture is really just excessive arching in the lower back at setup. So we've all, if you've taken any lessons and you've been given any pointers to try to get into a good setup position, maybe you've heard the phrase, hey, stick your butt out.
Is that why all golfers, look like they've got big butts?
Well, the good ones.
Yeah.
Which we'll talk about here shortly. But, and what we've learned, and maybe we'll talk about in a future episode, is, interpretation, intention, and execution, they don't always mean the same thing. So you can tell one individual, hey, stick your butt out. We might see a nice solid hinge from the waist, which I'll let you dive deep into what, explaining to the listeners what actually hinging from the waist means, because it's not necessarily the same definition for everybody. So yeah, you'll have some guys will take that advice and they'll do a really nice job. You'll have others that will flat out just stick their butt out and get a massive, massive arch in their back. But I think before going into, more detail with some of the consequences of that, I think it's worth, and I'd like to hand it over to you, being, more of an expert on that subject matter, talking about lower cross syndrome. And I want you to talk about why naturally we see a lot of players just have an overarching back in their setup. And then I'll follow that up with the issues that we see in the golf swing.
Yeah, so I mean, just physically, a lot of society spends sitting. So this lower cross syndrome has been around for quite some time, but just in simple layman's terms, it's a combination of some tightness in a few muscles and then some weakness in others. So specifically, if we think about the sitting posture, your hips are flexed, so your hip flexors are tight. They're very tight. They're very short all day. Yep, they shorten. And then your low back as well gets tight in that sitting posture. So the tightness in the hip flexors and the low back results in weakness in the abdominals and glutes. So we're very, fortunate in our society. We've got these comfortable chairs we're sitting in. We don't have to sit on the floor. We don't have to sit in some uncomfortable chairs. So as comfortable as they are, unfortunately, they have adverse effects on us because they turn our glutes off. We don't have to squat so low, things like that. So that lack of abdominal strength, some of that relaxing of the abdominal musculature, and sometimes it's associated with too much flex or bend in the knees, can result in that S posture. So those are kind of the physical components that contribute
as a compensation. If someone is struggling to hinge appropriately from the hips, yes, they're going to compensate by probably adding too much knee flex. And I just think to add on to that, since your glutes are not working properly, since your core is not working properly, that does create a compensation where you're getting, I guess it's called a synergistic. Your synergistic muscles like the hamstring, right? And lower back try to assist the glutes, right? And now they're being pulled elongated. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, you're on the right path.
Right. So, and that's where, I've even learned this, like you've got to be careful, and I don't want to jump too far ahead when correcting that, right? Or if we get, I want you to go into this a little.
I think you're talking a little bit about like firing patterns and things like that.
Yes.
So when we look at, squatting, when we look at doing different types of exercises, lunging, stuff like that, we want to make sure that the proper muscles are turned on to be able to do those correctly. Any person can squat, any person can lunge, but if their glutes aren't working, like you just said, hamstrings are getting overworked, lower back's getting trashed. So this is kind of a, nice little, connection with MAT. So MAT, we've had Bill on before, talked about, figuring out which muscles are working. If they're not working, how do we get those to fire so that the proper musculature is working when we are working in the gym, when we are getting, teaching somebody to get in a good setup posture and be able to maintain that through the swing.
Now, someone with lower cross syndrome, would you anticipate it being challenging for them to touch their toes? And do you have to be very careful with teaching them how to touch their toes, especially if their hamstrings are already elongated?
Yeah, I mean, you're jumping kind of ahead to some of our corrections that we would do to try and help somebody with this. But yeah, I mean, you alluded to it a little bit there. Improper instruction or just an improper interpretation of how to get into this setup posture is hinging. So yes, if somebody doesn't hinge correctly, it could be due to those physical limitations that are caused by lower cross syndrome. So yeah, you'd want to start at base one, teach them how to hinge, make sure that they can bend appropriate from their waist, and then make sure that they've got adequate strength and stability in those muscles to be able to perform that movement safely.
Okay. Prior to jumping into C posture, do we want to stay on S posture and talk a little bit about what we might see in the golf swing, or do we want to?
Yeah,
okay.
I think if you want to talk about some mechanical implications, I think that's appropriate.
Yeah, I mean, this all ties in together. If a guy's spine is not in neutral position, which I guess we can kind of define what that neutral position is, and that's why I kind of asked if we should dive into C posture first, because what I'm going to discuss now is definitely a correctional exercise drill that I like to introduce for both S and C posture. But anyhow, when we look at neutral spine, we're trying to get the back is as flat as we possibly can. Okay, we don't want a lot of arch and we don't want a lot of roundness. And the point is, we're trying to obviously rotate our upper body, we're trying to rotate our hips, and we want to stay in posture while we do that. Okay, and staying in posture basically means is when you get in setup, you essentially have 3 different angles that you can define as your posture. You've got a line drawn from your shoulder to your hips to your knee, and your knee to your ankle. And your goal is once you have those angles defined at setup, you would like to maintain those angles or close to those angles as much as possible when you start to move dynamically. And when those angles start to change, obviously, that's when we start to define and classify or characterize that as loss of posture. Now, when someone does not have a neutral spine, it's really, really tough to rotate upper and lower in a correct fashion. Sometimes it's not a perfect analogy, but sometimes I'll say like, hey, if I'm holding a pipe, a dead straight pipe, and it's like a foot long, Tommy, watch yourself. Oh, that's gonna make them laugh, hopefully. Anyway, and I grab it and I spin it off my fingers and I let it roll in the air. It's gonna roll pretty fast, right? Right. So if I were to bend it, right, and I tried the same thing, that's not gonna rotate as fast, right? Or as efficiently.
You're just talking about a straight pipe, like a metal pipe.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I've used this analogy before, and it's not perfect, but it gets to the idea. It makes my point that the more neutral your spine is, less curvature in it, the more easy you're going to be able to rotate, right? And separate for that matter. And separation basically means the difference between your shoulder rotation, torso rotation, and your hip rotation. If there's a kink in the spine, for lack of a better way to say it, those rotations become a lot more challenging. And chances are you're going to compensate by either staying at a posture, or we're not going to talk tonight, but really come disconnected with your arms.
Right. So, I mean, both S posture and C posture definitely go hand in hand, so we'll kind of jump back and forth between them. You jumped ahead, a little bit ahead there talking about the flat back versus the rounded back, and that gets into that C posture. But, I mean, real quick, just to kind of close the loop on the S posture, from my perspective, there's basically 2 things that maybe 3 things that we try to work on. You mentioned pelvic control or pelvic position being neutral, so we teach them how to figure out what's all the way back, what's all the way forward. So that's our pelvic tilt test that we talked about in the screening episode. An example of that is if anybody's been to rehab or anything like that, cats and dogs, cat camel exercise where you're on all fours and you kind of rotate your pelvis back and forth. So we just want to learn what it feels like to have the hips all the way back, hips all the way forward, and then figure out what that middle position is like. So we do that lying on the floor, we do it on all fours, then eventually we get people into their standing posture to be able to do that so they can get in that middle position. So pelvic control back and forth has to do with abdominal strength, lower back strength. So being able to control that's a little strength in the exercise, but then that awareness of where that pelvis is so that we can set it into a middle position. Because I've had a lot of people that have come in, looks like they've got a nice flat back, doesn't look like they've got that big extra curve in that lower back, but their hips are already pushed all the way back and locked out in that lower back, and that's going to restrict them from rotating there. So,
yeah, and I would just add, we'd be remiss not to mention that having that arch in your lower back is asking a lot of that part of the body. And you look at golf in general, and a big objective here at Smart Golf is to create longevity and prevent injury. Well, time and time again, if you're a player that notices that they struggle with a lot of lower back pain, which is chances are that you do because it's so common, well, you might have poor posture. And maybe the posture, as you said, might look good, but you don't have the supporting surroundings, right, in order for you to maintain that neutral position as easy as you should. And that's where we say all the time, it's like, we can put you through the screen, we can diagnose it, we can give you corrective exercises, but if you're still that guy sitting 8 hours a day in your chair and you're not allowing that part of your lifestyle to evolve, well, you're all but making it impossible for us to make a long-term solution for you.
Yeah, I mean, the S posture resonates with me personally because when I was in my 20s, or late 20s, I could only go to the driving range for a short period of time and my back would lock up. And I was that person that got a little bit of misinformation or misinterpreted some of the information, every time I set up to the golf ball, I actively pushed my hips back, tightened up my low back, and then I hit balls for 15, 20, 25 minutes and, limped off like I was 80 years old. So I was like, there's got to be something wrong. I thought it was just my spondy, but turns out I was, creating a bad position for myself because of, again, a misinterpretation of that positioning of how to get the butt back and how to hinge properly from the waist.
Sure. So I'll just say, like, as far as our correction goes, you've already kind of discussed a couple. Our coaches here will even have a guy in the lesson on their hands and knees trying to go through the cat and dog exercise, and to this day, and even 10 years ago, when we started, just got introduced to a lot of this stuff and a lot of these concepts and exercises. I still remember a guy in the physical screen. He could not even come close to have any pelvic tilt. He couldn't arch the back. He couldn't tuck it under. It didn't process for him. He didn't understand how to do it. The coordination wasn't there. And
was he single?
Well, if he wasn't after we got done with him, or if he was married, his wife was a lot happier after the fact. But no. And on a serious note, though, we spent 5 minutes, and he was getting worked up. We were not moving forward in the lesson until we could give him some pelvic control, which he thought we were nuts. And to no surprise, after about 5 minutes of work, putting him on hands and knees, him not getting upper body, helping stabilize him, eventually, boom, it cracked, and all of a sudden, it clicked. And he actually had a ton of range of motion, all right? So anyway, just wanted to describe that story, but that's the drill. Like, I'm going to have guys, once they can do it in cat dog, I'm going to have them get up, stand up. I'm going to teach them a little bit of a routine to get into good posture with the good angles from shoulder to hip, hip to knee to ankle. And then I'm going to make sure that the student has the ability to arch the back and tuck the pelvis under without losing posture. So what do we see, even upstairs in the gym? If they struggle to do it, where might they recruit from, Tommy? Well, they might add flex to the knees.
Yeah, they might bend those knees, squat a little bit more.
They might squat a little.
Stand up.
They might just flat out stand up. So the trick is, if you're at home or you're listening to this and you've never been through one of these screens and you're trying to experiment to see if you can do that, here's the test. Get into that good golf posture, and without losing any flex in the knee, without adding any extension in the knee, so they maintain their position, and then your upper body maintains its posture. See if you can arch the back, tuck it as far under as you can, arch the back again, and then find the middle between those two areas, and that's your neutral. And I just want to make an important note. You need to find neutral from what's called anterior tilt, which is butt out.
Or from the S posture position.
Or from the S posture position. Because if you find neutral from the rounded position, from the pelvis being completely tucked under, you're actually actively disengaging your core as you find neutral. Going from the S posture position to find neutral, you're actively engaging it.
Well, you're plugging in that extension cord in the front.
100%.
Getting those abdominals
That's more
engaged.
of a dynamic drill, is to keep the extension cords plugged in.
There we go. Cool. So I think we've kind of moved along. So S posture, excessive lower back curve, usually has to do with those hips being pushed back in order to get the butt back, increasing that curve in the lower back. So C posture, on the other hand, is like rounding of the upper back. So big rounded posture up
Think
top.
of your maybe 70, 80-year-old man at setup.
Sure, there's definitely demographics that fit into
Sure.
these areas. So, S posture is very, very typical for younger athletes, female athletes. Again, a little bit more flexible, but, lack some of the stability that's required there. Or just, from the junior standpoint, just not interpreting the information or interpreting it a different way. But yeah, the C posture is definitely, more typical in our older population. Again, those that sit a lot, maybe they, over a keyboard. Dentists, doctors, surgeons, that spend a lot of time hunched over for a long period of time, although a lot of those practices have gotten way more ergonomically correct.
Is it fair to say that S posture relates a little bit more to the lower part of the back, and then C posture relates a little bit more to the upper part of the back?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, like we talked about the pelvis, that affects that lumbar spine position. So S posture is definitely related to that lumbar spine, the lower part of the back. Bigger vertebrae, if we remember, that aren't supposed to rotate that much. Upper part of the back, the thoracic spine is where we typically see that C posture coming from.
So from a physical standpoint, looking at the screen, don't necessarily need to talk about the test specifically, but what might the test show as a result that would lead you to hypothesize that this guy's probably got C posture? Or just, obviously he's walking into the room, you can probably see some of it, but what are some of the characteristics physically or limitations that you'll see physically in that screen?
Yeah, so I mean, definitely the rounded upper back like we talked about. So we talk about that as being limited thoracic extension, so ability to straighten up your back. So oftentimes I'll go off script a little bit and just have my client sit down, my students sit down on the bench. I'll have them cross their arms across their shoulders, kind of round down, try to rotate. It's very difficult. Then I'll have them sit up as tall as they can with their arms across their shoulders, have them try and rotate. And that just shows them, why that rounded posture they came in with is just very, very limited in their golf swing. So that upper back is very, very rounded. We also have what's called upper cross syndrome. So a little bit opposite end of the spectrum is that lower cross syndrome, but very similar in nature because it also has to do with muscle imbalances. So we usually have like tightness in the pecs, tightness in the lats, upper traps, your levator scapula. And then we have some weakness kind of in your mid-scap muscles, your serratus anterior, lower traps, and some of your deep neck flexors. So you also see that head posture going forward because those deep neck flexors keep that chin tucked and that head back over in line with the shoulders. So with this C posture, like you said, upper part of the back, the way that I remembered it when I was learning it, it has to do with upper cross syndrome. S posture, lower part of the back, lower cross syndrome was the symptoms there, the physical stuff.
So we talk about the demographics and, knee-jerk reactions to think about the older population. But how about guys that are in the gym a lot, doing a lot of upper body working out, like doing a lot of push-ups, a lot of bench press, whatever other exercise that kind of creates that, rounded posture. Would you classify that as potential, in the C posture category?
Not potential.
It is,
yeah, basically. So, I mean, if you look at some of our workout regimens, we're trying to undo a lot of that stuff. So, again, the bench press is great. Chest press is great. Pressing strength is important. But you also have to do, some sort of corrective, and you also need to do some recovery that helps keep that thoracic extension there while you're building the strength in the pecs and the chest and the pushing muscles of that nature. So it's a combination. And oftentimes people weren't taught properly or they weren't educated on the fact that, hey, after we get, hit that heavy bench when we're younger and stuff like that, to, lie on a roller or lie over the top of a ball and get that area stretched out so we can keep that upper back mobile and extended and moving well while we're building up that massive amount of strength on the front of the chest. So we look good at the BF.
There's a reason when you look at the best players in the world, we're not seeing bodybuilder physiques. We've got some bigger guys out there. I mean, when I think of it, I guess Brooks Koepka might be the guy with the biggest guns out there, biggest physique. I could be wrong with that. I don't know. He'd probably love hearing me say that. But the point is there's limitations.
For a bit, and then he dialed himself back.
There's still though, those guys' frames are never going to be that of a guy like some of the guys that we have come in here that have zero range of motion because their biceps are the size of your head. But
Gary Woodland's always been a very well-statured guy, and stuff like that. Looks like an athlete, could play linebacker.
Sure.
But yeah, as far as the some of the other things that contribute to the C posture, talked a little bit about like scapular instability. So again, those are your scapula or your shoulder blades, and we talked a little bit about this leads into some other swing faults that we'll talk about. But we want those shoulder blades to kind of move up and down versus out, because if they move out, it affects the way your shoulders work, which also affects the way that your upper body rotates. So, and then we talk a little bit about some instability of your core muscles. So, realistically, we could go through this entire list of, 18 when we make it through all of them, and, it's all going to stem back to, core being strong. That one can be, a main culprit for a lot of these things. But again, it's always going to be a combination of not enough range of motion in some place, not a lot of strength in another place, and then how do those interact and what do they manifest themselves to be? In this particular instance, it shows up as a rounding of the upper back, which limits your ability to rotate.
Yeah, and I'll just mention, it's not always going to be you're not always going to have C posture because there's some physical issue. Honestly, it could be something really simple. Your clubs could be too short. Right? So, that's something to think about too. And again, that's where getting properly fit for your equipment is so important, because you could be setting yourself off on the wrong path right from the start just by having clubs that are not the right length for you. And then another one that people don't necessarily think about is you could literally start to get C posture just because your grip is too much in your fingers, right? Which makes you taller, right?
Yeah.
You start to get a little bit, and very rarely do you see guys gripping the club. I shouldn't say very rarely, but more often than not, it's too much in the palms. But yeah, if a guy's really understood that he's supposed to grip it in the fingers, and he gets really, really deep into the fingers, therefore creates some weird wrist angles, weird arm angles, gets him a little bit tall, rounding of the back. There can be some just mechanical issues on why you have a poor posture. But again, back to issues we see in the golf swing, coming back to posture as a whole. I would say more with C posture. S posture, C posture, we both worry. Both of those characteristics, we find it challenging and limiting in your ability to rotate as easily as you should. But, more so even with C posture, that's where you really start to see the instinct to overswing, where guys immediately disconnect their arms because their body's not in a position to allow them to rotate immediately, but they have a perception of where the top of their golf swing should be. So, essentially what they do, defining what overswinging is they swing the club further than they're physically capable of, right? Just because they want to generate some power, right? Goes back to things we said a million times, the origin of swing flaws. Hey, what feels powerful? What does my body do the easiest? You're going to compensate in order to generate a desirable amount of swing speed. So anything else you want to say on S and C posture?
No, I think we should talk about, just give them a little glimpse into what are some physical, corrections for the C posture. So again, we talked about trying to get the upper back a little bit more extended. So, lying just, flat on a roller lengthwise on your spine with your arms out to your side, just kind of letting gravity help open up the chest and the shoulders and that upper back. If there's any yogis out there, kind of lying on your stomach and pushing the chest up like a prone press up or a crocodile press up are pretty good. So again, we're extending that back, trying to get that roundness out of there and getting that up. And then, I've seen people, or I've seen golf instructors give hinging exercises a couple of different ways. So you've got the one where the club goes across the front of the waist. I think that's pretty appropriate for that S posture that we talked about before. C posture, I've seen people, put it behind the head into the lower back, right?
Yeah, you try to, and this is challenging, but some might say there's better drills in this, but I'll give it to guys. Yeah, I'll have them stand up tall, take a club, put it behind them, so the butt of the club is touching their head, and then the shaft of the club is touching their tailbone. And I say, hey, can you hinge from the waist and maintain contact with the club on your tailbone and head? And you'll see guys instinctively want to recruit from their neck. You'll see guys immediately when they hinge, it comes off their tailbone. But yes, we will teach them that exercise until they're able to successfully do so. Sometimes they got to work on that for a couple weeks before that's something that they no longer have to put the club behind them in order to start their routine. Another simple one is just putting the club behind your back, your upper back, and gripping, the shaft with your right hand and your shaft with the left hand, and it just obviously pulls your lats back, opens up your chest, and just kind of getting used to that feel.
Yeah.
You don't gotta.
Those aren't tips. Those are just ideas, things that we use in the gym.
Drills.
It's not going to work for you.
They're exercises. They're not, super sexy, but they work. So I'm not, I try to, as a coach, find the drills that get the job done and put them in my library, and they're, my go-tos on a regular basis.
Yeah. So that kind of caps it off for the two static posture faults that we typically see. Again, the S posture, excessive arch in the lower back. C posture, real rounded upper back. Want to move into the dynamic ones?
I do. Yeah, the last thing I would just say is, you cannot under stress the importance of your setup. And I just want to say that. And, I'm actually kind of surprised. I know both of us can sometimes be long-winded. I'll take ownership over that. But the fact that we were able to talk that long on S posture and C posture, which I'm glad we did, I was actually kind of surprised. I thought this would be a really quick episode, but
You're not off the hook. So yeah, I mean, the next one's just, it's very general in nature. So this one's kind of a weird one. It shows up in a lot of different ways, and a lot of the different faults that we'll talk about in the subsequent episodes, and even the one that we'll close out with tonight, can all fall into this category. The other ones are just more specific in nature. So, I think we can just kind of glance over this one real quick. It's, loss of posture, and I guess, it's just very, very general. Like if you don't have those angles that you talked about in the beginning, like that line from your shoulders to your hips, line from your knees or your hips to your knees, and then from your knees to your feet. If those angles don't match up at any point in your golf swing, it's considered, loss of posture. So.
No, 100%. I don't know if there's too much more we have to say on that. Again, it goes back to our philosophy of timing. When you have extra variables in your golf swing, it is harder to time. So if you're losing too much knee flex, if you're standing up and losing flexion, so rather than being hinged appropriately from the waist, and you're standing straight up in your golf posture, because again, you might be in a position, you might be in S or C posture, which forces that. And that's another thing I think we should at least highlight is, due to a poor setup of S or C posture, that 100% could lead to loss of posture in your backswing. And that's the other thing. There's loss of posture in the backswing, and there's also loss of posture in the downswing.
Right.
But yeah, at the end of the day, you hit the nail on the head. There's angles that you set up with. We want to maintain or be as close to them through the golf swing dynamically.
I mean, back in the day when you were helping 30% of the people and not helping 30% of the people, and some were getting worse.
Yeah,
so,
you love to remind me of that.
Well, no, I'm just asking a question. So, I mean, I would suspect there's other golf professionals out there that if they're not doing some sort of physical screen, if they're not figuring out what the underlying physical causes are, they might get somebody into this, perfect setup posture, but they're going to cause loss of posture when they try to get them into the next position, halfway back, up to the top and stuff like that, if they haven't looked at can they do that physically. So, a lot of the professionals are going to start with posture, grip, alignment, all real simple stuff, and then all of a sudden it starts to get dynamic, having to move the golf club, having to get to the, club into the, a certain position in the backswing with the club face, neutral or wherever you want to have it at the top, and then try to initiate some separation in the downswing, but they haven't looked at any physical limitations, and they're trying to get them into this position A or B or E or what, P1 or P2 or whatever you guys talk about, all the different stuff. Those golf professionals could be aiding in the fact that these people are losing posture because they haven't checked out whether they can actually do those things physically. They've all just focused a lot of their time on that static portion.
Yeah, I think I have a couple things to say. I mean, yeah, that's why the physical screen is so darn important, because you're going to avoid two situations, which we talk about on a regular basis, is one, spinning your wheels, right? Just asking someone to do something that no matter how good your information is or how hard you try or how loud you scream, if they physically can't do it, they physically can't do it. And that goes into, if you're really, really trying hard and you get them to start to move in that direction, now what do you risk, Tommy? Injury.
Yep.
Right. And, but back to what you said about just the guy on the range, you start to look at PGA, posture, grip, alignment. I've actually said in previous episodes is honestly looking at how hard it is to make changes dynamically, and if you're not doing physical screens, like I think, the best ones out there are actually falling in line with the PGA, kind of philosophy. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad philosophy for what I would consider limitations in their methodologies, right? Not going through the physical screen, right? Not doing long-term development programming. So if you want to have the biggest and fastest impact, let's make sure their setup's perfect immediately, because as it goes in line with our philosophy, the more you do right at the beginning, the more you're setting yourself up to do correct stuff later. But yeah, I mean, I think what you were saying too, just because you fixed just because you've created a great posture at a dress doesn't necessarily mean that that's the precursor or guarantee to have good posture dynamically.
Sure, and I think that's why I saw a lot of clients early on just working the physical side of things, is because there's a lot of great golf instructors in the area, a lot of guys that I've got great relationships with and things like that, and they, build a trusting relationship with their student, and they do a really, really great job on the front end, and then they run into that physical roadblock, and it's like, oh, I don't know how to go about this. And they might throw some of their greatest drills, greatest hits of drills, and they might make a little progress there, but eventually it comes down to the physical once again, so.
Yeah, just to add to that, I can't stress enough that chances are when you start to look at like the origin of swing flaws, powerful path of, what feels powerful, let me take the path of least resistance. Chances are, especially if you're a good athlete, you kind of might be maxed out with your golf swing. Of obviously there's grip and stuff we can change, but from a major movement pattern, you might be doing the best that you can be doing, unless you do exactly what you just stated, which is attack the physical side. And I'm no exception. When I get a chance to allocate time to practice, it ebbs and flows depending on where I'm at in the season, but for the most part, spending time in the gym is where I like to go first.
Sure. You want to bring us home with our last one for tonight, which flat shoulder plane? Kind of paint a picture for our
Yeah, we'll talk about flat shoulder plane. Again, I think it falls right in line with loss of posture for
Sure.
the most part. If you think of flat shoulder plane, I guess the way I could paint the picture is kind of by describing a drill we give and teaching how to do it wrong. But basically, if you're set up in golf posture, and I put a club across your chest, and you rotate it in your backswing, if you had a flat shoulder plane, the club across your chest would be parallel to the ground. And if you are actually maintaining posture and
You mean to tell me that the Earth is flat?
well, there's a lot of people out there that would agree with you.
All right, sorry.
But yeah, so obviously there's an angle from our hips to our upper body when we're at setup. The hope is that when you rotate into your backswing, that you've maintained that angle. And
The club will point out.
yeah, so if you were to do it correctly with the drill, if you had the club across your chest, it varies a little bit from iron to driver. But, just to paint a picture, if the ball's in front of you, you've got the club across your chest. Let's say the butt of the club is pointing to the target. As you rotate, you make it a point to get your lead shoulder past the golf ball, maybe the butt of the club past the golf ball, and pointing on a plane, call it 3 feet beyond the golf ball. It's kind of
It's angled down.
Arbitrary number,
Sure.
angled down, right? So yeah, I don't know if I necessarily see the importance on categorizing flat shoulder plane in its own category of.
I just think it's easier for people to actually visualize. Again, that loss of posture, it encompasses a handful, and the flat shoulder plane just kind of falls into tonight's theme of static and dynamic postures. So it's a dynamic loss of posture, particularly in the backswing.
Yeah, I agree. I think TPI, Titleist Performance Institute, I think what they were trying to paint the picture of is, loss of posture. I feel like they try to highlight the lower body a little bit more. So you're standing up, you're losing knee flexion.
Sure.
You're standing, and then flat shoulder planes a little bit more upper body centric, to where maybe your lower body and knee maintain good flexion, good posture, moves accordingly, but you've stood straight up and tilted your right shoulder back again.
Or lost that hinge.
Yeah, in order to try to get to a certain position in which you feel like you can generate club head speed.
Yeah, so some of the physical causes, just to stay along kind of the same lines, you mentioned separation a couple different ways times tonight. This is one in particular where lack of being able to rotate your shoulders separate of your hips and lower body particularly will cause this flat shoulder plane. So everything kind of works together to try to get that club back. You can even look at that lower body separation test as being a contributor as well. We go back to the core strength. We talked about that in both of the static posture faults there. So lacking core strength is going to wreak havoc on your golf swing all throughout, from your setup all the way throughout. So that's why that's not just a buzzword. It's definitely a very important focal point of a good golf fitness training regimen. So good core strength and stability there. And then ultimately you got to have good flexibility of the hips and shoulders, but which also lends itself to being able to separate. So again, like we talked about before, that stability mobility model, things are working together. If one area doesn't work well, it's going to cause a disruption in the pattern. It's going to cause compensation in a segment above or below, and then it's going to create these traits or faults or characteristics that we definitely don't want there. But again, we'll work around them if we have to.
Yep.
But you ultimately need to find out, is there a physical cause? Can we correct that physical cause to eliminate this particular characteristic, this particular fault, this particular variable in the golf swing to help make people more efficient and productive? So.
Yeah, well said. And like we said a number of times, start from the beginning. For all you guys out there searching on YouTube, loving your swing tips on Instagram, please make sure that at the very least your setup and posture and your ability to get neutral spine is perfect, is flawless. You're correct there, guys. That's the easiest stuff. The club's not moving. No excuse not to be fundamentally sound in your setup.
But when we talk about the flat shoulder plane, what happens to the club when can you stand
Well, I
up
was
and
just
the
going to
shoulders
talk
get flat?
about, and I'm so glad you brought that up, is, we sit here and we're talking about 4 swing characteristics, variables. But a lot of what we're talking about, and which we'll talk about in future episodes, lead to other swing characteristics and variables. So yeah, flat shoulder plane, we've all heard a very, very popular move in the golf swing called over the top.
Ooh, spoiler
What
alert.
does that mean? Well, that's a swing characteristic. I don't know why that'd be a swing characteristic. Well, I guess it is, because you can technically be over the top, and I guess play
You don't
decent
have to
golf.
have a flat shoulder plane to be over the top.
No,
There's
not
plenty of people that, make it back there and then they chuck that thing out there, and that, is another swing faulting characteristic. But ultimately, just what happens to the golf club, just, when you take the flat shoulder plane.
Yeah, it gets super laid off, gets super flat. It gets into what I consider a very heavy position, which then is a knee-jerk reaction to feel powerful. You launch it over playing. You start chopping wood.
Sure. And that's where, you can't just look at one of these areas by themselves. You can't just look at one area of the body. You have to understand how these things interact. So you have to have a long-term plan in terms of, if I'm going to change this, you have to know what other things are going to change as a result and what you're going to attack from there on out, because this might be somebody's planing mechanism. We'll talk about that in the over the top and stuff like that. But if you take away the way that they get the golf club back on plane or deliver it to the golf ball, and now all of a sudden they start missing the ball and stuff, that guy's not coming back.
Yeah, you got to be careful. And shit, I've seen it before. Although flat shoulder plane and staying out of posture is not something that you're necessarily teaching, but that could actually be a power move for them in the short term.
Sure.
Right?
Yep.
So it's like you take that away, and all of a sudden they lose a few miles per hour, and all of a sudden that hit is far. They're going to look at you as a coach like, oh, no, this is unacceptable. Why would I want to do this?
Well, you got to get worse before you get better, right?
Oh, yeah. Good one. Yeah, all right. Well, I think we've discussed all we need to talk about as far as the posture. You got something else you want to add?
Well, again, just want to talk a little bit, we've identified the problem.
Okay.
We've identified, but how do we fix it? So, one of the keys is to try to help people learn what that separation is between their upper body and lower body. So again, one, can they do it? So we like to do what's called an open book stretch, where you're lying on your side, keep the knees locked down, and then try to rotate your upper body. Some people call it an eagle stretch. Problem with the fitness industry is we've got 8 different names for 4 different stretches and stuff like that. So, but essentially all we're doing is lying on our side and trying to open up our chest and upper body to get that separation that we desire in the backswing. So we can do some mobilization, some self-mobilization, some reach back and reach under. So a lot of ways that I like to package some of my exercises together. I'll start with a stretch to get the musculature kind of stretched out, get the body in a good relaxed position, gain some more range of motion there. But the key is, once you get that range of motion, what else do you need through that range of motion?
Stability.
Yeah, so we'll go through a mobilization exercise to teach the body to move through that range of motion safely, and then we'll test it. We'll throw it through a stability exercise to see, hey, can you keep that range of motion stable now? And that's how we kind of gain some faster results versus just doing the stretching, just doing some mobilizations. We kind of package those together, and that's usually really effective. A lot of people like to use the cables, cable rows, cable presses. If we can put people in a little stride stance position, or if we even take it a step back, you did that example for the flat shoulder plane. So one thing I like to do to teach both of those things, one, the proper shoulder plane in the backswing, as well as how to create separation, is get in your golf posture, club across your shoulders, drop your left leg or your lead leg back behind you, get a lot of weight on that trail leg, and then have them rotate back and forth. So the hips don't move when you get into that little stride stance position. Really challenges the hip and the glute. So we like to be efficient in our methodology here. But those are just a couple things that I like to do. First of all, you've got to create that separation with that that stretch, getting the upper body to separate from the lower body. You can also do some other things like a stork turn, or some lower trunk.
Stork turn. What's that?
That's where you stand on one leg, put the foot behind the knee, and then rotate the lower body while you keep the upper body. So that helps with sequencing on the downswing. So we'll talk a little bit more about the importance of that when we get into some of the other swing faults going forward. But again, that's some of the corrections we like to make to try and resolve this flat shoulder plane and help people to get in a little better position backswing.
And so while they're in the gym and conditioning and properly preparing the body function better in the golf swing. I got a few favorites for this. One, you talked about it earlier, the extension cord drill. It's a little bit of an analogy, but it's also lends itself to a physical movement where I'll have an individual take a fist with their right hand for a right-handed golfer and put it at the bottom of their sternum. And then I will have them take their left hand and put it just above their pubic bone. And there will be a little bit of space between the two fists. And my goal, some guys will just have them have it plugged in immediately. And so the two fists are touching. And they'll say, hey, make a backswing and make sure they maintain connection. I like to create a little bit of a gap and say on your backswing, let's plug the extension cords in. So you're actually moving your sternum closer to your pubic bone in your backswing. I like to overdo stuff initially. Another good one is you can take a driver, called tail between the legs, kind of put it on your sternum to where once you're in posture, the butt of the club is actually sticking behind you between your knees, right? Anyway, the objective is if you stand up on a posture and have shoulder plane, where's that tail going to be? Well, it's not going to be pointing behind your legs anymore, right? It's going to be pointing down to the ground in front of you. So if you can make a backswing and have the tail still pointing behind you, that's a good indicator whether or not you've maintained posture. And then another just simple go-to is, guys, I love rotating with putting a Swiss ball between you and a ball on your butt, and just maintaining posture, maintaining pressure with the glutes and just letting the ball rotate on the wall is you have a shoulder across your chest and you're making sure when you rotate that the thing's pointing downward a little bit. Those are all good, I think, from a conceptual standpoint. I think ultimately, in order for someone to be able to maintain the posture at full speed, depending on what we discovered in the physical screen, that's a long-term play.
Oh, big
You
time.
can improve it immediately. You can make some setup changes very, very quickly. But if someone's losing posture, especially in the downswing, that's another swing flaw we haven't talked about called early extension. But you need some serious glute strength. You need some serious core strength.
The kings and queens.
Yeah,
of the
you
golf
need to
swing.
know how to use your feet and understand the ground feet interaction, which all teachable. We can make some massive, massive strides in the process of, getting your body to complement that move, be strong enough to support it. But until it can, we have to moderate and be reasonable with our expectations to how much evolution we should see when we're swinging at full speed.
Nice. Well, I'm pretty happy with it, what we got through tonight. Like I said, we'll do a little multi-part, but I think we did a pretty good job of highlighting a couple of those static swing faults and a couple of the dynamic ones. So.
No, I love it. Love the structure, and I look forward to discussing, the rest of them in future episodes.
Yeah, so this will be an ongoing tip, but get yourself in for a physical assessment so we can start to take care of some of these things and figure out what the root cause is and get rid of these cancers in your golf swing and, make some long-term positive change.
Make sure your posture is fundamentally sound.
Yes, sir. Kippis.
Cheers. A big thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Everything But the Tip podcast. Stay connected with us on all social media platforms by following @SmartGolfFitness. For additional episodes, updates, and exclusive content, check out our website at smartgolffitness.com. Don't forget to show some love, like, share, and subscribe to ensure you never miss out on the latest insights and engaging discussions. Your support means the world to us. Until next time, keep swinging and stay fit.